This podcast was brought to you by Words Never Spoken, a memoir by yours truly, Craig Stewart. It's available on Amazon.com, Audible.com, and all e-readers. It's more than a book. It's a movement.
Yeah, and again, it's all about experience. Because again, like you said to me, what was my thought when I saw those white guys at the event? The black guys at the event. Mm-hmm. I was automatically thinking, okay, these are black guys that do not date black men. But then the thing beneath that was, these are black men that probably have identity issues as well.
Yeah. There's some truth to that. The black guys there only date white guys, but there's, I think in that aspect, they help change minds there too.
This is very personal work for me. Politics. I believe I was called to tell my story, use my voice, be a voice for the community, to speak to and for a community of people that's been ignored, denied, overlooked.
Religion.
This is my life's work.
Religion.
I want to use words to uplift, heal, inspire, encourage.
Do something different. Every Monday at 10.
This podcast is brought to you by Kendra Brown Choice. Thank you so very much for supporting my gift, for supporting my dreams, and for being a friend. Your contribution helps me continue to do So Much to Say podcast. Thank you. If you'd like to sponsor an episode of So Much to Say, visit our GoFundMe account at www.go-fund.com/so-much-to-say-podcast. Thank you. Okay, so I wanted to have this conversation about the divide between the black gay community and the white gay community because I've noticed that there's a great divide between the two. And one of the things that stood out for me, I think it was about a year and a half ago, there was a dress code that was released that Blake's published or posted on the door at the club. And it just felt like it was specifically towards the black gay customers that come there. For those who are not familiar with the dress code that was published, I think they listed things like they prohibited gold chains, oversized jeans, hoodies. Yeah, just different things like the things that typically, quote unquote, black gay men would wear. Now, I don't particularly dress like that, but it definitely felt as if it was geared towards a certain clientele. And so there was this huge conversation in the black gay community, especially on social media, about boycotting Blake's. And I don't know how long that went on, because when I pass Blake's now, I definitely see black gay men at Blake's. But as a result of all of this uproar, Blake's issued a statement saying that it wasn't intended to be geared towards black gay men or any specific clientele. So again, that was just one of those points where I felt the divide was definitely present. Are there instances where you've ever felt that there's definitely a separation between the two communities outside of the obvious, like there's a black gay pride, and then there's a pride, a general pride, or a white pride?
I mean, I see it every weekend. Every Sunday, I see it. You have the corner of 10th and Piedmont, and I can be on the left-hand side at an establishment, and on the right-hand side is like the whites are over here, and the black community is on the opposite side. And I can't figure out why that is.
And you're talking about 10th, the place called 10th.
10 Atlanta,
yeah,
which I typically don't go to.
I've been one time, and there was a friend of mine that was in town, and he said, hey, meet me over here for a drink. And that was the first time that I'd been there, and there probably were two black people in there.
What's interesting, though, is I went with two black friends, and they liked 10 Atlanta. Where I wanted to be on the other side at Piedmont and 10th, and, of course, Blake's, and it was just, that was like an eye-opener.
Right. And Philip,
I can't explain that.
Part of the reason that I wanted you here is because we have all known you to be the owner of Outwrite Bookstore, which existed at 10th and Piedmont for how many years?
We were at 10th and Piedmont for, I guess, 15 years.
15 years.
And in business almost 20 years.
Yeah, and part of the reason that I wanted you here is because I know that E. Lynn Harris, he started his book signings at your store. That was the first place that he would do any signing. Every time he released a book, he would always start at Outright because you guys were the first to carry his book. So part of the reason that I wanted you to be here, because as a business owner that catered to the entire gay community here in Atlanta, I'm just curious if you ever noticed or saw any of this.
Well, I've always seen that divide. I came out at a very early age. I was in high school, and I was working, and I was able to get out to the bars well before I was legal. and mind you, the drinking age was 18 at that point.
Okay.
So I was in at a very early age, and I had a card to get into one of the bars that got me in, and I didn't have to show my ID, which is how I got in at 16. And I gave it to a friend of mine that I worked with, who was also gay and was African American, and they took the card from him because he didn't have the ID to go with it. He didn't have 3 pieces of ID is what they asked for from African American customers. So
And this was here in Atlanta?
This is here in Atlanta.
Okay.
So there's always been a divide, and I think over the past how many years since I've been out? The past 40 years, it's gotten better. And there are times that we have been integrated at clubs and bars and events. I think that it's cyclical. I think that you have to make an effort to mix. You have to make an effort to be with people who are not like you.
Right.
As our good friend Duncan Teague would say, the most segregated time in America is Sunday morning when people go to church.
Go to church, yeah.
And I would say that now perhaps Saturday night at the club could be the most segregated time in our community. And obviously sometimes Sunday night can be. I would mention as far as the Club 10, I think when it opened, it was, when I would go, it was a pretty white in there. There weren't a lot of African Americans. And as time has gone on, I've seen a good deal of, a good number of African American guys come in there. So it is more mixed than it was, but it's always going to be a push.
Right.
It's always, we can work on making things better, but there is just an innate nature of people that want to be around, or just tend to be around people that are like themselves. And you have to make an effort to go out of your way to make
And I don't think that the responsibility falls on the white gay community. I'm just saying I think that, to your point, I think we all have to make the effort to merge, because if we're supposed to be the gay community, those outside of the gay community aren't thinking, oh, well, the white gay community or the black gay, they're looking at us all the same in terms of the gay community.
So when you say they're looking at us all the same, I think that's interesting because, outside of our communities, a lot of times we're lumped together and like we're just so happy and
Exactly.
and merged together
Right.
and we're all fighting for the same. And I think we know within the community that there are some differences. But I think there are some places where we can align, and I think like Philip said, like there are times where you have to be intentional about ensuring that, so in my personal life, I just don't have some of these issues. Just in my, like, I can wake up on a Sunday and know it's going to be good, but then I'm strategic with my friends. I'm strategic about where I go. And then there are times when I move in certain spaces where I know I'm going to bump into some of those differences. I don't use, like, for an example of that would be like, dating apps. You can see some of that explicitness called out on the dating apps. And then we get into this discussion around, like, everyone has the ability to have a preference, but is it beyond that preference? Like, how does it show up? Like, if you won't date outside your race or exclusively, when does it change into an ism? When
does it bleed into something else?
Right.
It's interesting that you said that because I was just in Houston for a book signing, and there was a conversation about preference. And well, no, it's just my preference that I want to date men that are more masculine. I don't want to date men that are feminine. And I asked the question of the person who said it, well, is that really a preference, or is that sliding over into internalized homophobia? So like, where you know what I mean? Which is it? Because I think that we all come to this community with a certain amount of internalized homophobia. But I don't want to go into that conversation.
Well, that's still a divide.
It is
That's
a
an
divide.
explicit
It's
divide.
absolutely a divide. And that's a part of this series that I want to do this
Mm-hmm.
season with the podcast, because there's not just a divide between the black and white gay communities. There's a divide between the gay community and the lesbian community.
Mm-hmm.
There's a divide between the gay community and the trans community. And then when you further delineate the gay community or the subculture as in itself, there is this divide in terms of masculine versus feminine. And then when you go into other communities, it's the bald community versus the whatever. You know what I mean? It just keeps going and going. So I'm just trying to figure out, well, let me go to this. Another instance where I realized that there was a divide, just about a month or so ago, I think Flirt had an event, and it was in the park. It was like a beach theme kind of party, and everybody had on shorts, like swimming trunks and tank tops. And so I was actually sitting at 10th and Piedmont. I had just finished having something to eat and drink there. And I saw all these people walking in droves. I'm like, where are these people going? So I literally, when I was done, I started following them to see where they were going. I was actually with someone who was in town. And in the middle of the park, at the pool house, there was this huge event. I walked over, and it was all white gay men.
Not all.
Well, correct me, right. It was majority white gay men, because and when I walked up, I was like, well, there are probably like a handful of black gay guys in here. And they weren't anybody that I recognized, like the black guys. Not to say that I know every black gay guy in Atlanta, because I don't. But the faces just didn't look familiar. And I'm like, well, to me, it felt like they were guys that typically moved in white gay circles. So they didn't seem like anybody that I knew or people that I was connected to. And so when I got to the front, I asked the guy who was taking the tickets, I said, what is this event? This looks really interesting. There was a DJ. And they said that it was benefiting, I believe, Jerusalem House. And Jerusalem House is, for those who are listening, is a place, it's an organization that supports people living with HIV and AIDS. I think they provide all of the services, whether it's housing, medication, whatever. And so the proceeds from this party all went to benefit the Jerusalem House. And I thought it was fantastic. And so I remember saying to them, well, how did I not know about this? Like, where did they promote this? You know what I'm saying? And so they told me that the tickets were like $100 in advance. And then after that, I think they were like $130. I'm like, this would have been an incredible event. Like, why wasn't this cross-promoted? And so, again, it was just another one of those events.
Was it Joining Hearts?
Yeah.
Was it Joining Hearts?
Okay, I was getting ready to say,
Yeah.
I was going to say.
Right, so I mean, but again, even if I missed the boat and just didn't hear, but like, why weren't there? There really wasn't a balance in this crowd. So it was like, why is there a need for a separate event? Why is there a need for a separate pride? I know the answer, the literal answer is because there wasn't really much representation for black people at general pride. So I understand why we did it, but I'm asking, why did we have to do it?
But you know that there's a lot of people who don't understand that answer.
Uh-huh.
And like
And
even
it
still,
rears its head every
yeah,
year.
it happens all the time. And like, are we still talking about this in 2017? Like, yeah.
Right.
So there are people who don't know that answer.
Right,
Well,
right.
Let's hear your answer, and then maybe we can share our answer.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean, and it's similar
Coming
to
out,
like,
but we know we're going to hear that.
well, it's similar to like, even if you think like the larger, there was a Miss USA that never honored black women, and then there was a black Miss USA created, or there was a larger pride that was missing some outreach and promotion to black people or black gays. And then even apart from that, even if that did not occur, there's still a reason to celebrate who we are. And so we can do that without, we can host a black gay pride, because I've been to both. I've been to larger pride. I've been to black gay pride. I don't do any pride anymore for the most part. I've gotten my life in it. But I see a purpose for it.
Because I burned my 20s out.
Right. I've been doing that for 20 years. But I see the purpose for it. And it's okay. And this is where it gets a little tricky, because it's kind of hard to talk about like the differences without like talking about the differences of race. And like what that means to literally, there's a way in which coming up as a black gay man, my only understanding of being gay was white. And then that's how you learn attraction. And so when you begin to find like, wait, black men are actually beautiful and I'm attracted to them, there's a way that we can celebrate that. Like it's so complex. It's like so many layers to it. So I'm trying to slice it to the simplest.
And I think that Pride and Black Gay Pride came out of two different formats. Atlanta Pride was started from a march and a rally, and then the parties developed around it. And Black Gay Pride came from a weekend where people came from parties, and then the events, the official events, the workshops came into place after that. And there was an attempt in the early 90s, about the time we opened Outwrite, to make it more workshops and marches in the Life Atlanta. The name never took off for the whole weekend, and I wish it had, but people call it Black Gay Pride, and I think it gives people an understanding that there are specific things that any community needs. And the argument about why do we need a pride and a Black Gay Pride, you might as well ask, why do you need gay pride? Why, as opposed to straight pride?
Right.
So the people need to be educated to understand it's a different event, and you could have, we could have a Latino gay pride in Atlanta if the community felt a need to be
to single out one, to designate one. I think some of the obvious reasons, though, for separating the pride is because when I first came here to Atlanta, the prides were definitely driven more to a white audience. When you look at the entertainment, it wasn't really inclusive. But then on the other side of it, speaking to what you were just talking about, like when the Pride first started, it was really about the rallies and that kind of thing. You can't have this conversation and really not talk about the closetedness of black community to be able to participate in those rallies and things, because we've grown to that. But when you think about our level of closetedness at that time, because we weren't necessarily participating in the workshops and walking down 10th Street to be caught on television, because then our friends and family and coworkers are going to see us on Pride. So there definitely there's a conversation, a piece around that as well.
That's interesting though, Craig, because I've also dealt with that. Attending Pride as a white man, like, oh gosh, who's going to see me? So I think that's a similarity.
Yeah, and I think that's also one of the divides. Like, how out you are then dictates what you have access to.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so because I can walk in a parade in larger pride carrying the flag, and I've literally done it, and that was intentional. As Craig got a look on his face, I'm checking with your look on your face. But that was an intentional thing to do, because that was something that, like, I had saw it on television, saw it was always at a distance, and now living in a city that actually has a pride, my goal was to march in a pride and carry the flag, because I saw that done, and that was my example of freedom. But then with that level of freedom comes access. Like, that means I can go to Outwrite and learn that, there's a melting pot of things happening in this bookstore. Whereas someone else who's not out might not find that resource or find that support. And then that meant that I could go to the Black Gay discussion groups, and now from those discussion groups end up with a community that knows and supports me, and you know what I mean? So some of that is about the divide, because if you're not out and you don't feel comfortable, then you're limited on where you're going to go.
Right. And it speaks to the amount of access you have to resources, as you were saying, because it even trickles down to HIV/AIDS resources and programs. Because if you're not out and you're so concerned about going to a gay organization to get tested, or to go and get medication because they're offering free medication in the event that you are positive, it's gonna impact all of that. So I think some of it does speak to where you stand as an individual. But what I will say is, even though there is a divide, I definitely see the efforts. And like you were saying earlier, that we have definitely come a long way. When I was promoting A Day in the Life, my stage play, I don't even know if you remember this.
I do remember. When you promote, I remember.
Yes. You were always very willing to allow me to post my flyers and my poster in the glass right there at 10th and Piedmont. And the same is true with like Einstein's. Like when I've had 2 different book signings there, they allowed me to do book signings there. Like on Pride Weekend, Black Gay Pride Weekend, they never asked me for a dime. They never asked me for a percentage. Like they were very accommodating. What is it that you need? Do you need a table? Do you need tablecloth? Do you need microphones?
That's great.
So they were very, very supportive. I just wanted to have this conversation because I think there's always work that can be done, because it even trickles down into to dating. there is this idea that oftentimes black gay men or white gay, when black and white mix in terms of dating, from our vantage point, the conversation piece is, well, it's really just about sex for the white guy. And then also in some communities or in some conversations you hear, well, the black guy is just dating just because they either A, don't think that longevity is possible with another black guy, or because there's this idea that black men are non-committal, or because of the fringe benefits, we'll call it. What do you think in terms of the whole dating component? Do you think about that?
I mean, I think, we are in a age of dating apps that are easily accessible in our phones, and you look at one, Scruff in particular, it's predominantly white. You look at Jacked, and it's predominantly black. So I think even our apps are dividing us. I can't tell you how many times I'm Jacked, I'll get a message, are you into black men?
Really?
It's very interesting to me that you're asking me this question.
Right.
One.
Right.
And I don't know, are your takes differently on
I'm
the
married,
apps?
so I'm not on the dating app. I would guess that they wanted to clear it up before they met with you.
Which also it speaks to the divide, because there are times when in dating, I'm married too. I'm not on the apps now. I have been in the past, but
So two of you are married and two of us are single. What you trying to say?
no, it's just that's the place I can speak from today.
Oh, okay.
Just in case our husbands are listening.
Right.
That's the place I can speak from today. But I have been on the apps, and I mean, I get that question. I mean, we wouldn't want it. I mean, it would be a beautiful world if we didn't have to ask it. But there are too many times where we're going to bump into that, where someone is like, well, no, you're nice, or you're cute for a black guy. I mean, it happens. Those things. And if you have that happen enough, then you have to, it's almost like that top-bottom conversation. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes you just want to clear it up so there's no misunderstandings, or so that you don't bump into the rejection. And
That's not saying it's right.
I'm not saying it's right. I'm definitely not saying it's right. I'm just saying.
You have to start with the reality and work to change it as you can.
One of the best relationship advice that I tend to give to my fam too now. You can't go up to a game of Monopoly and start throwing out Uno cards. Like, it's just like
What a metaphor.
Well, and expect to win. Like, you can do it, but
Yeah.
you can't expect to win at Monopoly throwing out Uno cards.
cards,
It's just not
right.
going to happen. Meaning, like, you have a basic understanding of how things are, and then you have to play the game that way. And that's unfortunate. Some people get tired of it. Like, get tired of the rejection and bumping into that divide, and so they want to clear it up in advance. And so I can see how that happens.
What's interesting is I used to live in LA, and in LA, of course, it's a melting pot. Like, you have a huge Hispanic community, white community, and there's somewhat of a black community, black gay community. What I've always heard before moving to LA, and even once I got there and experienced it for myself, there really isn't much of a sense of community in terms of the black gay community. So a lot of times you do see interracial dating in California, or in LA in particular. But in Atlanta, you don't really see it a lot. And every now and then you will see it. And I've had people say to me, well, have you ever dated outside your race? The answer to that is yes. I dated a Salvadorian guy, but that was once I moved to LA. Because most of my adult life as a gay person, I've lived in Atlanta. And with such a large black gay population, there really hasn't been a need, you know what I mean, to date outside of my race. So I don't know if it's about access, or if it's been about a preference, or
It gets tricky.
It becomes tricky.
I would guess it's a combination of both.
Yeah. Here's the other part. Like, when I look at organizations like HRC, GLAAD, the Trevor Project, I can even see, like, there's a divide, there's a lack of representation, I'll say. Like, when I look at their brochures or look at their websites, it doesn't really feel inclusive. And so, again, if we're this community, and I guess in saying this, I guess for the first time I'm thinking about how trans people can sometimes feel outcast or forgotten. I guess in some instances, like with the Trevor Project, they're working specifically with gay youth that are on track to commit suicide, or making attempts to commit suicide, and working with the parents. But there are absolutely black teens who struggle with their sexuality as well and are suicidal. but I don't really see a lot of representation from those organizations, whether it's GLAAD, whether it's the Trevor Project, et cetera. So I think that there's more work around that as well, especially when we're talking about homeless youth, gay youth, or represent the majority of youth that are homeless. A lot of those youth are gay youth of color.
The flip side for me would be, you know the work I do. I've been doing HIV work in Atlanta for 19 years now. So it's been a long time, 98. And so the reason why I knew about Joining Hearts is just because of the work that I do. And so because of the work that I do, it just sent me into many different communities.
Right.
And, I knew about Black and White Men Together. I knew about Joining Hearts. I knew about, like, different Trevor Project. I move in these spaces. Now, you're going to bump into the divide. But in my world and from my perspective, like, I can move in these spaces, and there's a community of us that support each other. And so I found that community, and I just live in that world.
Right.
And I can choose to see those divisions, or I can choose to live in my world where everybody's like.
I think and that's true. I think that what I'm getting more at is, are they reaching those people, those Black gay people or Hispanic gay people who don't work in the field of HIV, who don't have immediate or direct access to those? Are they reaching those? Are they reaching that community? That's the question I guess I'm asking. Because, like, again, like this, what was the organization called that I said they did the event in the park? Joining Hearts.
Yeah.
I've never heard of them.
Right.
And I've done plenty in the HIV community.
They do it every year.
They've been
Really?
doing it for
Forever. Since,
years.
like,
They're
forever.
in Georgia Boys, Project Q,
Yeah.
David, Peach Magazine. I would say that there's probably a lot of white people who don't know anything about what happens with the gentleman's ball.
The Gentleman's Ball, yeah.
There's probably, and it's there. There's information,
Right.
But they don't see it. They're not on the email list. They're
Right.
not hooked up with their social media.
Exactly.
So, I've not been involved with too many organizations where there hasn't been an effort to include more people, but it always takes an effort.
It definitely takes effort. And again, I think that the effort, it has to come from both sides. It's not, I don't at all think that it's the responsibility of white gay men. So I hope that's not what you're hearing. But I think that if we're all working towards the same common cause is what I'm saying. Because again, like that organization, Bleeding Heart, that was... Joining Heart. See? Joining Heart.
That's funny.
I think that's an exceptional idea. Like, I think that could have been really huge. I mean, if it had been cross promoted, and again, I'm sure there are things that are on our side that are planned on.
But I think Philip just gave a good example, like the Gentleman's Club. I think you just said
I've never heard of that.
Right, exactly.
The Gentleman's Ball has happened, year 5 maybe?
I think so.
And I mean, predominantly Black.
It is. And again, lesbians aren't really included in that either. So again, it's definitely.
But we don't know whether that invitation has been sent. I know I've gotten invitations to that one. I haven't gone. I might go after this conversation. But each person does what they can do.
Right.
I think that, one, we said on both sides, but not just on both sides, but internal of these organizations. So when I worked for Aid Atlanta, it was oftentimes thought of as like the white organization, and I'm like, I see who comes through our doors. Like, we are serving predominantly black
people, yes.
but we're still thought of as the white organization in the community. We had to do some work around that, but that was a strategic effort on our part, who worked at the organization to make those shifts and changes, and one, to promote what we were really doing, but then two, to also reach out and promote to community like who we really were. And that was an effort on our part to do that.
And I mean, there is, speaking of what you had mentioned earlier, Philip, there is definitely a huge gay Latino population here, because I mean, I've been to Latino night on Cheshire Bridge at the Jungle. You know what I mean? So, and I mean, when I've gone in there are people there, Latino people there, that I have never seen anyplace else. So there's definitely, and the guy that I was dating in L.A., that's Salvadorian, he now lives here for law school. And he said to me one day, he said, I finally understand what you meant about L.A. Because in L.A., it's definitely, the gay community is definitely influenced in terms of slanted towards the white gay community. When you go to West Hollywood, when you talk about the music, when you talk about just the clubs, the representation, that it's just not at all for people of color. You don't feel welcome at all. But he said to me, I finally understand what you're talking about. He said, like, when I'm here in Atlanta, like, this city is so black. And I said to him, I said, Atlanta's black, Georgia is white. And so he said to me, where are the Latino people? He said, like, I don't see them at Target. Like, he said, I don't see them when I go to the grocery store. And he said, it's not until I go to Buford Highway or I go to Cheshire Bridge and I'm hanging out that I actually see a Hispanic community. So I think that Atlanta has always been kind of divided in that way. And then even when you talk about just the black community, not black gay community, but just the black community, it is divided in terms of professionals and educated and where you live and all of that stuff. So people always say, black people always say that they're cliques. Atlanta is full of cliques.
A clique is a group of friends that you're not a part of. It's that simple.
Right.
And cliques happen,
Right.
There's a group of friends that I'm not a part of.
Yeah.
I don't consider them a clique. I don't like to use that word.
Mm-hmm.
It's a group of friends that we're not a part of.
Right.
But I think it's a good point. We're really a microcosm of the whole community. And we're seeing it across the country more than ever before.
Yeah.
People are divided. The country is divided. But I think what will come of this is people will unite. And people will go out and be intentional about it.
Yeah.
When I had Outwrite, we were very, very intentional of making sure that everybody was included. And everybody was trained that every single person had to have a big Southern welcome when they came in the door. Black, white, Hispanic, men, women, and I think we did pretty good. We did.
You did.
We did.
Job well
We did
done.
pretty good at getting a good mix of people in. Was it perfect? No. Did we get called out on things sometimes? Yes.
Well, that's just a part of, I think.
Sometimes they were right,
Yeah.
and we learned, and sometimes they were off base.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty proud that we did a very good job of having a good, diverse mix of people that came to the store and authors that came to the store. But it was hard. Some months, we could only book who we could book and get in, and we'd have a calendar. And some months, the lineup would be diverse. Some months it would be almost all white. Some months it would be almost all black. And you had to answer to the other communities. What is going on in your store? Why don't I see more things that represent me? Why don't I see my lives in the books? And we did what we could do, but you can only do so much.
Right. So even though, like, there are absolute instances where we parted together, the black community and the white community, you see it in places here throughout Atlanta. But I remember when I first moved here, Colors, which is now Mix, wasn't it primarily a white club at one point, and then somehow
it did a switch.
and then it did a switch. But the same was the case with Bulldogs.
Bulldogs did a
Same was the case with Bulldogs. Now Bulldogs is predominantly black. Have you had instances, Chuck? Because I know you and I have talked about your dating history, and you like men of color. Have you experienced any sort of maybe discrimination, or have you ever felt anything when you've gone places with?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I was in San Francisco in January on a date with a guy that I thought I was dating. He just happened to live in San Francisco. So I flew out there. We were at a really nice restaurant. The waiter was great all evening. It came time for the check to be given, and he automatically
Gave it
brought
to you.
me. And Quincy was like, this happens all the time. And I've seen that a little bit here in Atlanta.
Instead of just putting it in the middle of the table.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I had no intentions on buying dinner that night. But it happens here, though, too.
Right.
I get that a lot.
So has anybody ever said anything to you? Like, why do you predominantly date black men or men of color?
A couple of my black friends
Have asked that.
actually asked that.
Really?
What's interesting is that one of them, he predominantly likes white men. But he's always intrigued with, my preference,
Got
I
it.
suppose, of why I am naturally attracted to black men. I can't figure it out.
Right.
It's just natural to me. I've dated white, I dated Hispanic, I dated black.
But you know what the thing is, like, when I first moved here also, like, there were more clubs that integrated lesbians and gays too, and you just do not see that. So this is not just a color thing. I'm really trying to get to the base of why it happens in the gay community, because it happens in so many arenas.
But I don't want to just shame the gay community because it's happening in larger communities.
No, of course.
You know what I mean?
Of
so
course.
meaning like I don't think it's happening anymore. Like there are straight people having the same conversation.
For sure.
For different segments
different reasons, right.
of their community. And so that's one thing I do. But you're right. I mean, when I first came to Atlanta, it was the other side. And like,
Right. When I tell you the other
the
side,
other
like,
side was everything to me because now when I say everything, it was black.
it was black. It was black. It was black.
It was black, but there were trans girls there.
There were
lesbians.
there were
there,
lesbians. It was like an equal balance
Yeah.
of gay men and
gay
lesbians.
men, and at different times.
Yeah, and
but
then-
we just don't. I don't think we have that anymore.
That was
Right.
before my time here.
When did you come here?
2004.
Yeah. Was that? Yeah.
I
But
came
even me
in.
moving here,
Yeah.
I thought it was like a southern thing. I thought it was division.
Right.
And then as I started to meet gay men, white, black, they're not all from the South.
Right. No. Yeah.
You know,
Because
we
Atlanta
bring
is
our perspectives
from wherever you come from. Yeah.
I have a question for you.
Go ahead.
Chuck, so dating black men, how do your white friends feel about that? And then I have a question for you.
The majority are fine with it. I do have
Do
two
you
that...
bump into like discrimination or people like calling it out? Or,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you get discrimination from the white friends too?
Absolutely.
Oh. Well, what they say, Chuck?
They will not. They will not go to Bulldogs with me. They will not
Because
go
that's where you and I met in Bulldogs. He walked up on me and stepped on my foot by
It was an
mistake.
accident.
I know it was an accident. He had come in
Well, the
with.
drinks are
Many
very
drinks.
strong.
Yeah, well, he had just walked through the door. He had just walked through the door. He had just walked through the door, and you were with your coworkers, right?
I was with
One of your
one
friends.
of my friends, two of my friends, and then
And a
my coworker,
coworker, right.
Her partner.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and so it was a complete accident. He stepped on my foot. I wasn't even looking, and I turned around. He said, "Oh my God, I'm so
I did
sorry."
apologize.
Yeah, he did apologize, and so that was how we actually met. So you've had guys or some of your white friends say, "Well, listen, no, I'm not going to Bulldogs." Or,
Because if we get to like that's a part of the divide.
yeah,
Absolutely.
for
So
sure.
I mean, like having real conversations, and some of those
Absolutely.
conversations have to happen apart from us.
Yes.
And then some of it has to be like this.
Right.
You know
right.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
What was your question for me?
And my question for you, Craig, would be, and it's similar to what you said about joining hearts. And this
Which
is
I
the
call something else.
This
Leading
is the right. This is the conversation we sometimes, and we have like apart. We'll have these kind of conversations. But when you walk up on Joining Hearts and you see a few black men there, what do you think of them?
My first thought.
And what do you think of the men that may be with Chuck? And Chuck is minding his business in a relationship and just dating. What do you think?
Yeah, it's all biased and it's all prejudging. Because like I said, when I mentioned the whole Joining Hearts, when I walked in and I saw like a handful of black guys, I'm like, oh, these are black guys that only date white men. That was my assumption.
And
that's a real thing.
That's a real
and I'm not
thing.
saying that
That
I was
is a-
and I'm not saying
that
that I
is a
was
real thing.
I'm not saying I was accurate in making that judgment.
That is a real
but
thing.
there are absolutely black men that will not date a black guy.
But taking that even deeper, like the layers underneath, when you make that judgment that that's a black man that only dates a white man, like what else is underneath that? That gets at our divide too. Because like that means you do this or you vote this or you act this or
Right.
You know what I mean?
You're right. We start to box people in.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, you're right. You're absolutely right.
I mean, I heard that, and I probably would have thought the same. Well,
No.
I would have thought the same thing in a situation where I wasn't familiar. I probably would have bumped up and been like, "Oh, this is Joining Hearts," because of the HIV work that I do.
Right.
We've partnered together, and I would have known.
Right.
But if I bumped into some other group that I wasn't familiar with, I may have made the same.
Right. But I think it's important, like you were saying, I think it's important to have difficult conversations because those difficult conversations do allow you to bridge communities. And that's whether you're talking about the gay and straight communities, whether you're talking about people that have disabilities and those who do not. Like or the trans community having conversations. So sometimes you have to run the risk of what?
So this week, this difficult conversation this week, and I've had it a few times, and particularly online, with, and I don't understand it, a gay Trump supporter.
I don't understand.
Yeah.
I'm not right there with
connecting with that.
And
Right.
they exist.
Yeah,
This is a
yeah.
real thing.
Right.
And
Well, I've read articles where they've said in these articles that's because white supremacy trumps, no pun intended.
Our sexual identity.
Yes, yes.
I think in those cases where you have an LGBT Trump supporter, it's selfishness.
Yeah.
Trump's
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think it's supremacy. I think it's what's in it for me. What's
Right.
in it for me economically.
Right,
Like,
right.
Then I'm past the point where I can have that conversation
Yeah,
with anybody.
yeah, I get it.
And that is a huge divide.
It is.
I mean, I've bumped into a few that
Recently?
even this week I've had the conversation, and I'm like, really? Like, because this week's conversation was really one or two waking up to who Trump is, and Charlottesville happened this week, and then that the press conference that just went off the road, and there's some people who are like waking up. But I'm like, you didn't wake up when like he did the transgender tweet.
Right.
You didn't wake up when.
Where were you for all of that?
Where were you for? I mean, like along the way, he
Yeah.
sent you these messages, and you're just waking up now.
Right.
Like, I don't get that,
Right.
and that can be like
Yeah.
And I don't know. The two people that I'm thinking about this week were white. I don't know. I mean, I could probably handle that better. I don't know a black gay Trump supporter.
Oh, I thought you were
I
going to say
bet
black.
they exist.
I was going to say, because they're definitely
I
black.
bet they exist, but I
Well, Paris Denard. Now, he hasn't admitted that he's gay, but yeah, I said it. This is so much to say. This is so much to say. Oh, so you're just going to drink your cocktail, Chuck? Paris Denard.
And there you have it.
For sure.
He's in the sunken place.
Listen.
Yeah, it certainly has been quite a week.
Yeah, and I guess I bring that up because if we're having that kind of week in the country, yet again, I mean, I love LGBT people. And so I just don't want us to down ourselves like we're getting it wrong and they're getting it right. Like, if this is what it looks like in the country, then of course we're going to still experience it amongst us.
Right. Yeah, and I believe that because a lot of times when you have conversations about relationships, oftentimes somebody usually says, well, straight people go through the same things. I never want to come off as saying they've gotten that part right and we need to
Because
still
it's not
figure
that way.
Because it's not that way. But I think that there's still room for us to aspire to be better at what we do. Right. Because I think that as a collective, we could be so much stronger as a community.
I think there is an expectation
Yeah.
that as a minority, we should understand, we should be accepting of minorities.
Right.
Innately get it. But
Yeah.
people have different upbringings.
Yeah.
People don't get it, and there's a lot of racism in every community. So I wish we were further along than we are, and I think we're further along than when I came out, but we're not there. I would say it's been an interesting week with Charlottesville and everything on everybody's mind. And I had an experience getting on the MARTA train the other day where I got on and I was very much thinking about race, and I went out of my way to sit next to a person of color. And I had it's not like I normally would sit next to the white person or the person of color, but I never really thought about it. And I thought, just sit next to that person and see what happens. And
Right.
they were surprised.
Uh-huh.
And it was very empowering, and
Yeah.
it made me think about how I'm going to go forward, and that's making sure I continue to look everybody in the eye, go out of my way to treat people with respect, and be aware that there's people hurting right now,
Right.
and there's people that are discriminated against every day, and there's people that think that I, as a white person, might hate them.
So what made you think that he or she was surprised? Did you guys end up having a conversation?
No, we just sat there.
Right.
You just know.
But you just knew, yeah.
When somebody is.
And it's interesting that you say that because you said that you went out of your way to sit next to a person of color. In recent times, and I've always been one to try to make the effort to support black businesses, but as of late, I've been making it my intention, not to exclude anybody else, but I've tried to make it my business to support black business as often as possible, just because it's critical at this time. And we see what we're up against at this point.
And I think what we're talking about is, for me, my final point would be like being intentional and strategic in how we, move about. So you talked about, making this connection on a train or supporting black businesses. And I think as someone who has been discriminated against in experienced a lot of stuff around that. Now that I'm at the place that I'm at, like, I don't just go to black gay marches. You know, I'm
exactly.
not trans, but I go to, if I love LGBT people, then I show up for those issues and I support those issues.
Right.
And I support it with my vote and my dollars
Yes.
and my actions. And I think we just have to be strategic in that way.
Right.
I'll go to the Women's March, or I will support a gay-owned business, not just black-owned.
Absolutely.
But I support gay-owned business.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I think if many of us will take that time to be strategic and intentional with who we say we are, then I don't think like this, you know, love is love and we all just get along. I think those are more than just sayings. Like that shows up in your actions. That shows up in who you are, who you vote for, where you spend your dollars, where you spend your time, and where you volunteer, and like it shows up in action. And that's what I would say is that.
Yeah, I think we all have a responsibility for each other. And coming back to your comment of, you know, can we all just get along? Can't we? Get too deep into this, but even with dating, you know, black men and hearing from white acquaintances who will have sex with a black man, but the next day they don't want anything to do with them. And black men often, you know, it's that perceived or that perception of, you know, they're just looking for money. I think you started
I mentioned that, yeah.
And, I mean, I experienced that.
Right.
That's something.
Yeah, and again, it's all about experience. Like, because again, like you said to me, what was my thought when I saw those white guys at the event? The black guys at the event. I was automatically thinking, okay, these are black guys that do not date black men. But then the thing beneath that was, these are black men that probably have identity issues as well.
Yeah. That's what I was getting to. Yeah,
I knew where you were going.
Typically black men, you're not going to see at Bulldogs.
Yeah.
Correct.
Right.
Well, there's a lot of black men, gay black men, that you won't see at Bulldogs. They go to other places.
Yeah.
I would say I run in the circles of Joining Hearts. And,
Yeah.
there's some truth to that. The black guys there only date white guys, but I think in that aspect, they help change minds there too. And the guys that they date that are white, they usually are just taking a lead by saying, I'm dating both races. I have a couple of friends that
I'm dating both races. I can ride, and actually I can ride with Chuck.
Yeah, but when you say,
but I have a hard time with a black man that only dates white men.
yeah,
That is hard.
And if I really think about it, I would have a problem with a white guy who said, I only date black men.
why?
Because I just think that speaks to your identity. I think you have some identity stuff.
But if you're attracted, it doesn't mean that they haven't dated a person of of their own race.
Right, but when you say if you're a black person and you say, well, I feel like you. I felt very offended because I'm black, and I feel very offended.
I should know you.
Absolutely, but I still feel some sort of similar feeling when a person, whether you're Hispanic and you say, oh, I only date black guys, or I only date white guys. And if you're a white guy that only dates out of your race, I think that really speaks to some identity stuff. I think there's some work that has to be done. Like,
I don't know.
This is the divide.
I've dated white men. I've dated Hispanic men. I've dated black men.
no, you have, yeah, but you've never said, oh, I'm only going to date a black guy.
And I think what
Not at all.
and I was going to say, I think when someone says, I'm only going to date this, it comes off as a dismissal of what you're not dating as something wrong or less
or subpar.
Well,
or
a
discriminated
lot of times
against.
they do turn their nose up when they say it.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I've literally been places, and I've had black guys that won't even, and not anybody that I've tried to talk to or approach, but they literally completely dismiss any other black guy. And I'm not just talking about when I lived in LA. I felt it here in Atlanta.
I get it.
You know, it's like they all of a sudden feel like because they date white men that they're somehow better than the rest of the black boys. You know what I'm saying? It's just like, who do you really think you are? You know what I mean?
I can tell you that the black men that I dated in Atlanta have never reached that point where you just mentioned.
Right, okay.
They're,
Yeah.
It's just all very interesting to me.
I know one or two, and when I say no one, like, I have I can't.
You know one or two black guys?
That
that
only date,
only
like,
date white.
literally say it.
And I had a friend, a white guy, older guy. We were so cool. Like, and I just haven't seen him in a long time. But he only dated black guys. Well, he preferred to date black guys. He didn't only date black guys. He had dated some white guys. But he said to me, my preference is black men. And he said to me, and I couldn't even be mad because I have felt that similarly. And he said, but black men just seem so non-committal. He said, I just can't get them to commit.
Wait a minute, Craig. Wait a minute, Craig.
Listen, I have felt that.
And I'm glad you were honest on your own show.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, Craig.
Listen, I didn't say all black men.
You just said you felt this yourself.
I have felt that.
And weren't we just talking about identity issues?
No, but I've only dated black men. I dated one guy that was from El Salvador. But what I'm saying is, I'm not saying that I felt that about all black men. You know, I champion Terry and Richard. I mean, like, there's several couples, Wendell and Steven. Like, there are plenty of black couples that I aspire to be. You know what I mean? To mimic. But no, I don't feel like there aren't black men that are committal. But what I'm saying is, I've definitely felt that I've run into enough of them that are non-committal. And I'm not saying that that's... And
I was going to say, I bet Chuck, you've run into a whole bunch of...
And that's my point. I've not dated white men, so I can't say what white men do, gay white men do. So I'm not saying that it doesn't exist. Absolutely. I'm not saying that it doesn't exist. I'm not saying that my experience...
But your experience.
Exactly. And that's the same thing like when you hear gay men say... if I was straight, I'd be married by now, I'd be in a relationship. Well, how many women did you date?
Right.
Like, what's the ratio of men you've dated versus the women you've dated?
Right.
So, of course, you've had more bad experiences with men because you've only dated one woman.
Right.
Or two. You done dated 15 men. You know what I'm saying? So, the balance is off.
Right.
So, that's what I'm saying. So, I'm not saying that non-committal thing is only a black thing. I'm not saying that at all. I think that's a man thing. Okay. Gay, straight, black, white, whatever. That's a man thing.
I agree with that.
You guys really came alive when
That was good.
Well, thank you all for coming and having this conversation. I think this is a good step in the right direction. This podcast is called So Much to Say. We are available on Spotify, SoundCloud, YouTube, iTunes, wherever you can listen to podcasts. Be sure to subscribe. Be sure to share this with your friends, your family, your network. And thanks for listening.